Martin, how are you doing today?
Good morning, Pierre. All good here. How about yourself?
I am doing absolutely fantastic, and I want to just start off by congratulating you to the promotion as Director of Sale and Business Development of GIG.
Okay, thank you very much. It's appreciated. A big challenge, but I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, Martin. And after knowing you for a couple of years, I've been impressed by the journey that you had. I was happy to see that you were able to take this on. So, yeah, exciting times.
No, absolutely. It's James did a great job for us on sales, so it's not as if I'm having to devise an entire new strategy. I'm picking up where he left off, and we already have a great team in place. We're adding a few new people in order to bring sales, BD and marketing together, but ultimately the base is there in order to build upon, so I'm quite happy about that.
Absolutely, and it seems like the GIG has really good momentum now. The quarterly report came out the other day; showed it was really great, and it's a lot of good momentum. So it's I'm excited to see what's to come here with the GIG. But before we head into, I want to ask you a little bit more about GIG later on. But the topic of the day is regulatory implementation and where we are heading. And we're talking regulation today, and if any two people can make regulation. A discussion around regulation fun. It's you and me, Martin. So, are you ready?
Yeah, I think we can manage that. I think people might be quite interested on our views on these things.
Yes, absolutely, we are. And so I'm curious to start here. The pre-regulated, newly regulated, and post-regulated markets, they all have their own challenges, right? But
yep.
And it's something we talked about in the prep call here as well, that you segmented them into these three different segments. Can you talk about each one of the challenges that these segments bring? Like what does a pre-regulated, a newly regulated, and a post-regulated market? What are the challenges into these segments?
Okay, so let's start with pre-regulated. So generally, as you know, our strategy is very much concentrating on the regulated market side of things.
Right.
However, we need to be a little bit ahead of the curve. So if a market is discussing regulation, then we want to be very much involved in that market. Now, what does that mean? It means that either we wait until the regulation is finalised and then we go into that market. We may already be in that market with other brands through an MGA scenario, or it means that we need to go into that market initially for a pre-period of time with an MGA scenario, for example, and then change it to the newly regulated scenario. Now, what does that mean? It ultimately means for us that it's a lot more work, because from a technical perspective, because firstly we need to deliver the solution in the instance that would be required now from a compliance perspective, but then ultimately, when the regulation becomes live, in the run-up to that, we need to deliver an instance that will allow for that. So the pre-regulated, we see it as an opportunity because we get to know the customer, we can understand how things operate, and ultimately it should give us an opportunity in certain scenarios in order to be able to work with the regulator, in order to help them understand how best to deliver regulation in their jurisdiction. So, but it depends, because some regulators are open to discussion and some aren't. So the idea of harmonisation, even in somewhere like the US, really doesn't exist like it should, in my opinion. So so we said pre-regulation in terms of newly regulated markets. That's a big opportunity. Some might turn around and say, okay, so data will tell you that you need to invest a third more marketing budget in order to maintain the same level of NGR, and there's no doubt that that's true. However, again, we see this as an opportunity because we're very much about retail to online. So what we see with the retail to online scenario is that these guys have a lot of experience of regulation from the retail side, so they understand it better. And obviously, with us not doing white labels anymore, all of the liability from a compliance perspective tends to sit with the operator who has the license. So these guys have that exposure, they have that understanding, and that creates a partnership between us and them in order to drive their brand equity and ensure that they're getting the biggest opportunity from their marketing spend in a more it doesn't necessarily need to be a more competitive market, but ultimately their marketing spend isn't going as far as it would have done pre-regulation. So it's about creating a partnership with these guys within a new sort of framework, and ensuring that they can take the brand equity they have, they can take the existing customer base that they have, and they can create a seamless scenario between their retail and their online offering.
Right.
And then,
right.
and then, and in terms of the regulator within these scenarios, again, I'd love to say that there was 3 or 4 different instances and we could put them all into these buckets, but unfortunately, each one has their own unique nuances. So, if you take Germany, for example, it's a really interesting scenario, because a year ago, if you told me that Germany would be partially regulated, from my experience I've worked in Germany and done business in Germany for many years, I would never ever have thought that could be possible, because it's just not in their psyche and their makeup.
Yeah.
But we have
efficient Germans, yes.
Absolutely. And we have this scenario now whereby it's really, really complicated, and it's not clear exactly when it's going to be resolved. So it's... And obviously in Germany as well, the actual regulator has only just been appointed in the last couple of weeks as well.
Right.
And
when you say partially regulated, you mean the operators are regulated, but not the platforms, for example? Or?
Well, no, what I mean is that there's certain scenarios, like, for example, the central activity database that's mentioned in the legislation. Okay, however, that's not been implemented yet. So there's certain aspects of the regulation that have been implemented and certain aspects that haven't. Okay. So, now, obviously, this takes time, I appreciate that, and changes need to occur in order to improve. We're a big advocate for looking after the player and making sure that they're not operating in unsafe environments, but we're absolutely for that. But in the same token, if the line is drawn, we would like it, obviously everybody would like it to be there, do you understand? So, with these newly regulated markets, it's unclear with each of them if that is the actual line and that's where it's going to stop, and all the work that we deliver, the content providers, everybody within the market has to deliver. Okay, whether that's going to be it finished or whether there's going to be further work further down the line, ultimately eating into margin and revenue.
Right.
And then the more established regulated markets, I suppose it's very similar to the newly regulated markets. Let's take Italy, for example. I mean, I read recently that Italy are talking about reducing their licenses from like 120 to round about 40.
Right, and so increasing prices.
And increasing prices, exactly, right? So this is interesting because in 2017, 2018, when they were reviewing it, they wanted to give more people the opportunity in order to enter the market. But with the potential marketing restrictions that they have there, obviously you need some sort of brand equity in order to be able to get any substantial market share. So these small guys are taking, or the smaller guys within the equation are taking small chunks of the market, and ultimately it's so small it must be very, very difficult for them to be profitable. So it's interesting that the regulator is looking at the overall scenario and saying that ultimately we need 40 brands in this market, or 40 operators with licenses, and we see that as the most competitive landscape in order to build it, rather than having the 100, 120 that they have now. Yeah. So it's really interesting that Italy's one of the most established individual country regulations, and it's really interesting their evolution. And what you'll probably find is that each jurisdiction will go through an evolution. It might be slightly different depending on the market and the consumers in that market and the regulator itself, but ultimately they'll go through an evolution of understanding and making adjustments. And we you know what, again, we see that as a competitive advantage for us, because given the configuration in our scenario in the gig platform, it allows us to be able to adjust relatively quickly and move forward with it.
All right, yeah, interesting to hear that. And I have a question as well on especially around the newly regulated markets. And regulation that is often up for interpretation. I think Sweden was a great example of this when the regulation was launched, and it wasn't clear to the operators exactly what the regulator meant in some instances, and it had to go to court multiple times before the operators actually understood what the regulator meant. What do you get the same feeling here as well, that this tends to be a recurring issue for newly regulated markets? And how do GIG tackle this ambiguousness in the newly regulated markets for their clients?
Okay, so first of all, we have a fantastic legal and compliance team. They are, Claudio Caruana, who you may have seen in certain publications over the years, he's a machine when it comes to these things, genuinely, and he's our Bible when we have to discuss these things, Pierre.
A compliance machine, I like it.
He is a compliance machine, compliance and legal machine. But ultimately, what this comes down to is your risk appetite as a license holder. Okay, so as I sort of indicated, configuration within a platform, whether it's Gig, whether it's anybody else, the majority have a certain level of configuration within them. And ultimately, it's down to the license holder to define what their risk appetite is across each of the various compliance areas that exist. So, for example, the UK is a really good example of this, Pierre. I remember listening to an interview with the UKGC individual. His name escapes me at the minute, but I remember him saying that we are not going to explicitly say what the operators should deliver in terms of RG, in terms of data, in terms of protection of the customer. Okay, what we expect, they're the guy. Basically, what he was saying is the operators are the guys with the data, with information, and it's down to them in order to define exactly how they're going to work within our framework that we've created. So it's not an explicit, this is how it has to work, but obviously the UK has issued lots of fines for various reasons. But going back to my original point, that it's ultimately down to the risk appetite of the organisation, and ultimately, I suppose the officiousness of the regulator themselves. It's a combination of both of those in order to understand the happy medium and be able to operate and do things that work but protect the player at the same time.
Right. Yeah, it's also ties a little bit together with something else I've been thinking about, which is the fact that going back to Sweden, when the regulation was launched, it seemed very much that it took the industry by surprise in how strict the regulation actually was, and many operators seemed to struggle at that time to stay compliant with the strict new regulation. It seems that the industry wasn't really prepared for that level of scrutiny, in other words. But from my humble eyes, it seems that the industry has really adjusted to, let's say, the new normal, or what you could call it in this strictly regulated environment. What, in your opinion, Martin, what's the biggest difference in how you approach staying compliant then to now?
I think it's about maturity, Pierre. I think that the industry, not just Gig, again, the industry as a whole has matured and understood that, and it's understood that regulation is an inevitability. It's an inevitability. So there was a long time when we thought that, there's still some brands that are arguing about the MGA scenario and being able to operate across the EU, for example. So there's still people maybe a little bit further back than some others. You always have that within an industry, right? But as a whole, if we take maturity from a regulatory perspective, I think the industry has matured massively. Is it where finance is? Yeah, absolutely not. Okay, because they've had decades of it. Yeah. But if we say that we've had a decade of regulation, then there's no question in my mind that everybody has had to start to consider it as part of their strategy and had to consider it as part of the impact that it has on their business. Now, the way that we view it, and it took a little bit of time for sure, but the way that we view it is that actually it helps you create a more sustainable organisation in the long term, and it allows you to create a more sustainable customer base for not just the B2B customers we have, but also the consumers that they serve. So, right. I think in the past, maybe that was less of a concern, but now, because of the inevitability of regulation, people have embraced it, and by embracing it and making it part of your strategy. And if you look at anything that we at Gig outwardly market, it's generally around regulated markets and retail to online. That's our sort of tagline. That's what we want to promote. That's where we want to be. That's our sweet spot. So as soon as the regulation gets embraced into a commercial strategy, then it becomes more important. And it becomes more mature. And if you look on LinkedIn, Pierre, if you and I were to go on to the job section on LinkedIn for iGaming, right? I guarantee you that 20% of the roles are in compliance now.
Yeah.
So that in itself tells you how important it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like the industry really walked through the fire there for a couple of years. The whole industry changed, had to change, and there was a couple of years where it felt like the industry was struggling a bit in order to come to terms with this new world of staying compliant and what it meant to their organizations. It's obviously extremely resource heavy, as you mentioned here as well. But out of that came some really great organizations, and it seemed, organizations like GIG have adjusted to this and kind of taken advantage of the fact that especially the European markets are so strictly regulated, and your expertise can then obviously bring new clients to market. But I'm curious to know as well, looking at Europe, operators seems to have a little bit the feeling of that the European market is slightly flat, let's say, in revenue-wise, and it's a lot about optimization in Europe and so on. What do you feel? What's your predictions for the future of the European market, regulatory-wise, and how does DIG view it? Are you expecting the certain European jurisdictions to be growth markets still, or is the focus more on efficiency in these markets?
Well, we still see an opportunity in Europe as a whole. Now, obviously, there's certain markets where regulation has had a massive hit in terms of the revenue potential. We've mentioned Sweden and we've mentioned the UK, and it'll be interesting to see how Germany pans out. But I know that the regulation to date has certainly had an impact on potential revenues. However, there are still, I think, as a whole, in Europe as a whole, that you find that there's markets like Romania, like the Balkans, okay, even Portugal, for example, even Italy, given the opportunity, whereby if you have a competitive advantage with your tech platform, then you can actually continue to eat into the market share. We can help our customers drive revenue and increase their market share in these countries. And if you look at the H2 data, Pierre, as well, remember the shift from retail to online continues year on year. So I think pre-COVID, I think it was about 12% of the overall gambling market was online, and now it's up to 15-16%. So that's accelerated that scenario, which means that in all of these markets that there's still an opportunity. I mean, we're talking about billions and billions of euros here.
Right.
So there's still an opportunity, but I think it's really important that you're armed from a regulatory perspective, that you have a partner in terms of your tech. And I think I've said this many times before as well, but I think data is really, really important. I think that in the past, affiliates have driven a big chunk of the revenue. If you look at the performance of our media business, it's incredible. It's still the case, right? Yeah. But you can get a competitive advantage through your data and optimization and your UX on your site. If you build these things and you have brand equity, like I discussed earlier with regards to the retail brands, then you can still grow a brand within these markets. Absolutely. Yeah,
it's a really interesting niche that you found that was really accelerated by the pandemic, of course, where all of a sudden the land-based casinos had a very good incentive to go to online, and it's a clear there's a clear trend with that shift, of course, and I've learned that through previous sessions that we've done before. And, I will disclose as well, I'm a shareholder of GIG as well. I think it's important to mention here. And so my last question is something that is important to myself as well, which is, after some time of soul searching within GIG, it really feels like the company is destined for really good things again. Like I said, the quarterly report here last week was great, and the investors are happy. But can you tell us a little bit more, like what do you see as the GIG's vision for the next couple of years? Where do you want to take the company? Where do you envision this to go? Because it's not only, you have the media side as well, of course, the sportsbook, and on top of the platform. Where do you see the company going?
So you're right. We've had 5 quarters in a row where we've shown positive results. So that's a step in the right direction. And the teams across GIG, I can talk about platform because that's my area. And right. Everybody in platform, and I'm sure in media as well, are working incredibly hard in order to deal with the challenges that we face in the market at the moment. And we've discussed one of the main ones today, Pierre, in terms of regulation and compliance. Right. That's when we are trying to grow, when we are looking at the addressable market that we have as a platform. It's one of the biggest challenges, and it's something that we need to constantly keep on top of, which is why I'm so appreciative of people like Claudio that I mentioned. So we believe that we will be, or we know that we will be a platform of choice within regulated markets, because we know we can deliver within these markets. Yeah. We understand the different nuances. We believe we can bring value in conversations with regulators, as I sort of indicated to you as well, if that is their want. So from the platform perspective, we see it growing. We are very selective about the customers that we want to bring onto our platform. We don't want anything sort of flash in the pan. We want to be dealing with large brands, preferably in regulated or regulating markets, so that we can take advantage of their sort of brand equity that I mentioned to you. So I think more of the same. Obviously, from a tech perspective, we need to continually update and iterate on what we have, because without that, we're going to stay stagnant. And innovation isn't in the name of GIG by chance. It's there for a reason. We need to innovate. We need to be ahead of the curve. And ultimately, we want to increase our market share, Pierre, within this addressable market that I mentioned to you. That's where we want to be. And we're having, the sales team that we have now, next week we have another salesperson starting in the team, which I'm really looking forward to. And the conversations that we're having with everybody across this addressable market is really, really interesting. And I see a lot of partnerships being created, and ultimately is working together in order to create a win-win scenario. And that's win from their perspective, but win from obviously our perspective as well. I think that's how I see the next 2-3 years. Awesome.
Well, I can see you have a nicely drawn photo of Diego Maradona here behind you, so you could say that the idea is the Diego Maradona of platforms. You could say, in other words, that's the vision.
I'm not, I suppose so, but I'm not sure some people would like that. Diego Maradona, 1986. Let's say.
All right. Okay. Let's stick to that. Yeah. Okay. What a great way to end the conversation today, I think. Martin, thank you for giving us an update here on the regulatory implementation and landscape in Europe at the moment. And obviously, it's an exciting journey that you're on, and I'm very much following and looking forward to what's to come in your journey. And congratulations again to the promotion, Martin. It's been great talking to you today. Any last words from your end?
No, thanks for your time, Pierre. I always enjoy our conversations and look forward to the next one.
Absolutely. Same here, buddy. Take care of yourself, okay?
All the best. Cheers, Pierre. Bye-bye.
Bye.